Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about enterprise resource planning software. And first we're going to take a look at it from a historical perspective to kind of grab a timeline as to how ERP has been developed over the course of time. That helps you understand the architectural methodologies that have been used over the course of the last 30 to 40 years. Then we're going to talk about a brief definition of what ERP is. And when I say brief, what we're really getting into is we're just trying to get a framework so that we can drill into it and look at some of the functionality that ERP provides to businesses and to IT companies as they develop software and use software in the business world. The next area that we're going to take a look at today is we're going to look at some examples of what ERP systems look like. We're going to diagram out what an ERP system would look like for a company, either small, medium, or large. And then finally, ERP presents a bunch of common concerns or problems that implementers, managers, and administrators need to take into consideration when looking at ERP. So first what we're going to do is we're going to look at the historical perspective of ERP. ERP was originally started back around the 1960s to the early 70s, and really what it came down to was it was a system to help manufacturers have a better process of developing their software or their products. Around 1972, 5 people from IBM in Germany left IBM and started a company called SAP to help build ERP systems. Around 1978, the mainframe ERP system was developed, and this is the basis of the systems that we see today in business. As the evolution continued, what we evolved from is in a mainframe situation, from an architectural perspective, is we evolved into a client-server environment roughly in the late 80s through roughly 1992. Then the internet happened. And that really did change a lot of how business conducts itself and how IT presents software and applications to its end users. And the end-tier architecture has taken hold in ERP system architecture today. And as we see in this class that we're talking about ERP, middleware is the key component in developing software or delivering software and developing it. So that's kind of the historical perspective that we have seen so far with ERP. So let's talk about a definition. Let's get into what ERP really is. The ERP term implied systems designed to use in an enterprise, all across the enterprise, be it financial, manufacturing, customer-facing, back-office products. And it was originally designed back in the late 60s in a manufacturing space. But today, ERP is so much more. Manufacturing is only one key component of an ERP system. So to broaden that definition and to carry it a little bit further is that ERP is really designed to integrate all the data and processes in an organization through a unified system. The typical ERP system has multiple components, either in software or hardware, to achieve this integration. And it's a key point to note here that integration in ERP is probably the most complex and the most difficult part of any ERP implementation or maintenance as the system goes live. Now, the key ingredient to any ERP system is a basic database. And up until, well, not really up until, it's kind of a continuing evolution of ERP systems, is that some systems have multiple databases and other system vendors have a single database. So what we're going to focus in on is we're going to focus in on an ERP system diagram today that has one central database. So in order to define the first characteristics of an ERP system is we're going to talk about this as the database. That is where all the data, that's where all the processes are stored so that the system can be integrated and function normally. Now when we're talking about this database, what is it handling? It's handling the manufacturing and logistics, the distribution, the inventory, the shipping, and the invoicing, and accounting for a company. So when we look at that, what we're really talking about over here is we're talking about back office processes. And these are key pieces of functionality that an ERP system would employ. So you would have inside your back office, you'd have your financial applications. You'd have your manufacturing apps. And then maybe you would have your inventory, as we talked about previously. These are key components of any business as they are conducting their business. So you want to make sure that their financial applications meet Sarbanes-Oxley requirements. You want to make sure that their manufacturing applications are able to produce the products and ship it, and to track the inventory so that you can know what you've bought or sold. In a larger perspective, you want to put these and consider these as your suppliers. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes. So as we've talked about in the back office area of functionality, the key benefits that we're deriving from ERP is cycle time reduction. What that really means is that we're trying to speed up the cycle of business so that we can be faster at getting our products to market, our financial results to Wall Street, so forth and so on. It also means that we want faster transactions. If we look on this side, which we'll describe in a minute, you want to talk about faster transactions from a customer perspective. In today's world, customers are expecting to have their product shipped to them very quickly. If you take Amazon.com, for example, when you order a book, you're expecting to see it within 24 to 48 hours in some cases. ERP is also an area where the basic foundations of e-commerce started. So as we've developed our e-commerce over time, the data and the business functionality and processes were derived directly from ERP. Now let's talk about some potential risks to this functionality before we go forward. Some of the potential risks are ERP systems can be very difficult to implement. And in some cases, this difficulty has caused businesses to miss key moments in their business cycles throughout the year. A good example would be Hershey's Chocolates implemented an ERP system in the late 90s, and their implementation caused them to miss the Halloween sales cycle for their candy. So let's talk about an ERP system example. So we've gone over the functionality and we've talked about the definition. So let's look at some examples of what an ERP system would look like. And the first one we want to look at today is we want to look at supply chain management. Now, supply chain management is a hybrid of your standard ERP system because it takes the key elements in a supply chain to build a product and ship it to your customers. So the key thing you want to think of when you think of supply chain management is how do we change the information flows or the data sets that allow a firm to make good decisions on delivering their product to market. So if you bring in a new product, how do you retool the system to allow that product to come through the system efficiently? And with the use of ERP, you can do cross-organizational planning, scheduling, and optimization to allow a supply chain system to develop itself. Supply chain typically deals predominantly with the manufacturing applications and the inventory applications from your supplier side. And then you would couple that with what would be typically known as a customer relationship management side. Now this is the customer side, so we're going to talk about the customer side here for a minute. So when we talk about CRM, what we're talking about here now is we're talking about sales and delivery in service to your applications. So if I have sales here and I have service here, the key elements on this side of an ERP system is now we're forward facing. Instead of being back office, you can kind of think of this as front office. This is what customers see. This is what you would see when you log on to the internet. If you log on to Amazon.com, that customer portal is part of their CRM system that allows their customer access into their system itself. So you're talking about sales. Well, in a traditional corporate environment, you may be talking about how to generate leads or generate proposals to attract new customers. In the service side, you might be talking about help desks or call centers or field service operations where your sales force is out there and that's how they communicate with the home office. And then finally, there are some other examples of systems in an ERP system that need to be noted because they are key components. One would be HR. Human resources used to be just about payroll and managing your resources within your organization. Today, human resources, their system or their portion of an ERP system is absolutely critical. When you start to look at service level architecture or service-oriented architecture, HR data becomes very critical. The other side would be decision support. Now, what is decision support? Decision support, in the traditional sense, was data warehousing. But really what we've turned it into in the last few years in decision support is how does management take granular data and turn it into valuable information to make a good business decision. So an example would be, in your particular area, what is the most popular TV sold at Best Buy today? In your area, it might be TV A. In my area, it might be TV B. It would be real important for Best Buy to understand which TVs are selling in which area more effectively. By using a decision support system, they can data mine the information stored within their ERP system to say, you know what, we need to send more TV A's into this area as opposed to into area B. So as you can see, we've kind of developed a basic diagram of an ERP system. So what we have here is we have the customer side, the front office. We have the back office, which is traditionally where ERP systems reside. We've talked a little bit about how critical HR data is important to the internal workings of a system. And then decision support. And again, it's all related to a single database in most cases. But in other cases, vendors have chosen to do multiple databases. And in that case, you would have this diagram replicated multiple times dealing with one particular component of this diagram. So these are some of the examples that we've reviewed. So let's talk about some common concerns, because when you talk about ERP implementations, concerns typically come up right away. And they're really broken down into a few key areas. First, you have inadequate investment or training. So a company purchases a vendor's software, it's implemented, but they don't spend enough money to develop it correctly. They cut corners, so the investment is inadequately funded. The training, the people involved in managing the software or using the software don't understand how to use it. That is a huge problem that in many ERP implementations is difficult to overcome. Or the implementation and the testing of how their business processes were implemented was shortchanged, and therefore they spend thousands and thousands of hours in a maintenance phase going back and retooling the system. Some of the other concerns that you need to take a look at when dealing with ERP or business software is personnel turnover. If your turnover is great, it's more difficult to manage the software. And some of the vendors have gotten into automating some of this and trying to streamline it to reduce that common concern. Some of the other concerns that have been raised in business is that ERP systems are extremely expensive to install, and in some cases the return on investment can be greater than 10 years. Coca-Cola spent close to $500 million implementing their global system, and they have yet to have a single return on their investment to date. So in conclusion, what we've talked about today is we've talked about the historical perspective of ERP. We've reviewed a definition of what ERP is and how it relates to the historical perspective. We've talked about some of the common functionality that you would see in an ERP system. We've diagrammed out an example of what an ERP system would look like, and we've taken a look at their common concerns.